Hi, I'm Eric. I'm back with a video, and it's Sunday, July 27th, which just happens to be my birthday. I am 77 years old today, which is really unbelievable. I have a lot of younger friends, and I think I'm like them, and they don't think they're like me, but someday they will be like me. So it raises the whole question of what is time about and what's life about. But that'll be for another discussion. There's a couple of things I want to talk about today. The first thing is just something I want to just kind of get off my chest. I just watched an interaction. Well, there's a couple of interactions I've seen where which just shows how out of touch and arrogant and ignorant and delusional Western diplomats are, quote unquote diplomats. I mean, they're hardly diplomatic because they're basically full of crap. So item number one was that this, I don't know what her name is, but this woman, the spokesperson for the United States at the United Nations, was lecturing China about China's trading relations with Russia during the Russia-Ukraine war, which Russia initiated unprovoked, of course. And how dare China offer any kind of trade with Russia that could be used for dual use for military purposes. She didn't talk about providing weapons or anything like that. She just said China sells components which could be made into weapons, but overlooking the fact that the entire war is the United States' fault. They staged a coup in 2014. They've armed Ukraine to the teeth, and yet they lecture China about its responsibility to restrain itself when the United States is the guilty party. It's amazing that they actually say this stuff in public, and I don't know who believes it. I guess they probably do it for public consumption in the United States, to get people to just buy into this. It's really unbelievable. The other example of that was Ursula von der Leyen. She's Ursula, always lying. Her name is von der Leyen, I guess would be the German pronunciation of it, or I don't know, von der Leyen or von der Leyen. She's always lying, And so she, again, went to China, and she was lecturing China on how it better shape up and get with the program, with the Western narrative about what China should and shouldn't do. And from what I understand, Xi Jinping just said, shut the F up. You don't know what the hell you're talking about. How dare you come to our house here in Beijing and tell us how we're supposed to conduct our affairs. The arrogance of this woman and her lies, constant lying, are just over the top. It's really incredible. And then you had the other case of who was Kaya Kallas, who was the foreign minister for the EU, and she was lecturing China about, I think it was China, about their inappropriate foreign policy, and she apparently was so uncultured and so uncouth that she lost her temper, and as a result spilled a cup of coffee. She was gesticulating or something. She brushed a cup of coffee, knocks the cup of coffee over. The coffee spills on the foreign minister's coat or some part of his clothing, and she demanded to have a photo op, and the Chinese are saying, we're not going to give you a photo op. You've got to promise us that you're going to, do things that we feel you need to do to go along with what we say. And she said, yes, we'll do that. And then she broke her promise. She lied anyway. So so you have this. It's like the West has been on this 500-year hegemony tear, just terrorizing the rest of the planet, dictating what the rest of the planet can and cannot do, and what they should and shouldn't do, and ripping the rest of the planet off, while telling them that they're the God's gift to the planet Earth. And the rest of the world is just not putting up with this. So I just thought I would just bring that to people's attention. Maybe you've seen this, but I just had to say something about it. It's just so outrageous. Now, the other thing, the main topic that I wanted to talk about is the fact that, as you may have noticed, I live in Thailand, and Thailand is a unique country because it attracts people from all over the world. It's kind of like you might say it's both a tourist destination as well as a kind of a safe haven. So you have this one phenomenon you have here where there's many temples that you can go to and you can practice meditation. And it's like, it costs you like, $7 a day to stay at a temple, and they give you a place to stay. They give you food, they give you instruction. You can stay there basically as long as you want, from 3 days to a month or more, even if you want to. And it's just a real, it's like a haven for spiritual seekers. But it's also for people who are just, there's a whole kind of digital nomad community here, where you have mostly younger people, but not necessarily, but generally younger people, who are trying to, start an online business. Conditions in their respective country are not optimal for them for whatever reason. They don't feel comfortable. It may be, I know there's one guy in particular who's a really great guy. He was an electrical engineer. I think he was trained as an electrical engineer. Was working in Silicon Valley, 12 hours a day, working in a cubicle. He just thought this is unacceptable. He discovered affiliate marketing. That is a form of marketing where you create a website and then you promote other people's products. You review products and do things like that, and you get paid a commission if people go to the website that you recommend and someone buys the product. You get a commission for it. So he made a fantastic living for himself. Married a Thai woman. They've got a child. He's living a great life, and he's a really good guy. So he's an example of a digital nomad, and there are many other people like that in Thailand. And as I mentioned, then you have a whole spiritual seeker group of people. So I meet Russian people. And a number of these people are very spiritual people. They practice yoga, or they practice, other spiritual practices. So you've got that aspect of it, both as I say, Russians and people of other countries, Chinese and from European countries. Many Koreans come here. People from Japan come here. There are many retirees like myself who basically, realize that. For whatever reason, I think maybe for political reasons or social reasons, just felt more comfortable in a country like Thailand, which is generally has been a very extremely peaceful country. The people are very polite. It's easy to live here. The climate's generally very good, and so I made that decision. I have other friends, who one friend of mine, he came here in 1985. He was an American guy, draft resistor, and he married a Thai woman who was studying at the university in the United States where he was studying, and he ended up marrying her, going to Thailand, and taught at the university as a professor at Chiang Mai University for a number of years. And they have a daughter, and he's living a very nice life. So you have different kinds of people coming here. Now, Now you're seeing that a fair number of people from Israel have come here, and a couple of years ago, actually, I stayed at a yoga resort in one of the islands in the South Thailand. I live in northern Thailand, which is closer to the Myanmar border and closer to Laos, and it's nowhere near the ocean. But there's a whole area of Thailand which is on the ocean. There's places called Phuket and Pattaya and Koh Phangan and Koh Samui islands. Those are islands where you can stay, and it's relatively inexpensive, probably less expensive than it would be in a European or a U.S. or North American country. And there are many like yoga centers and spiritual centers, and so there's a lot of people like that. So in 2022, I was staying at this yoga place. I wanted to improve my yoga practice, and when I had a number of interesting conversations. This particular yoga resort was owned and operated. I think it's still operating. It's owned and operated by Israelis, and many of the Israelis who go there are young people who have just finished their military service, and they're probably you could say maybe airing out, because of the stress of that, what they're doing, what they did in Israel. But there were other people there were older people there, and so I'll address, there were three people. One of them is a woman who was about roughly 50 years old, and she was telling me that she's in the peace movement. She advocates getting along with the Palestinians, and she says that 90% of Israelis really have no intention of doing that. They really hate Palestinians. They look down on them, and here we are, 2 years later, 3 years later, and they're happily supporting a genocide. It's what can I say? One of these guys I met, we were having a philosophical conversation about truth, and I said, I think truth is the highest value. We really need to seek truth. And he said something very interesting. He said, I want to be happy. I don't want to know the truth, because if I know the truth, I won't be happy. And this is completely contrary to, in Buddhism, there's something called the Four Noble Truths. The first one is life entails suffering. If you're alive, there's going to be things that you want that you can't have, and things that you don't want that you're going to get regardless of your wishes. So there's going to be unsatisfactoriness, and you're just going to have to deal with it. That in essence is the fundamental teaching of Buddhism. So in any case, this guy, is just saying, he's at a yoga resort, but he's not interested in truth or justice or anything like that. He just he's just blithely living in his world, wanted to be happy, and who cares about anybody else? This kind of isolation, this psychological and spiritual isolation, is a recipe for disaster, for literal disaster. And I met another young woman, very nice young woman, I think like 21 or something, and we were talking about the Palestinian issue. She says it's insoluble. And I'm thinking, well, why is it insoluble? It's a very simple solution. All you have to do is say that Palestinians are human beings who have equal rights because they were living there before you were, and why don't you just learn to get along and share the place equally? Why can't you do that? And but it's been brainwashed out of them. So that brings me to a conversation that I just had with this fellow. I think he's probably mid to late 30s, and he's got a very interesting background. He was born in Ukraine, and apparently he left Ukraine. His family left Ukraine. I think it was like in the late 1980s. they probably could see that there was something going on that was not going in a good direction, and they ended up migrating to Israel. And he basically grew up and lives in Israel. Now he also is a real devout student of Buddhism. So because I have also studied Buddhism for many years, and he has, we have great discussions where he'll ask me questions about things because clearly I'm a lot older than him. I have more experience. I've studied. I have greater familiarity with Buddhist teachings. So I can be acting kind of as a sounding board or somewhat of a mentor for him, you could say. One of the big questions that he had was the issue of how do we deal with of Buddhist truth, which I just described, where you're talking about the problem of suffering, the problem of our emotions, how do we deal with our inner life, that kind of thing. And on the other hand, you have the external world. So this raises a big issue for me, because what I see happening is that you've got there's a dilemma in the human community. That is, there's some people who really don't care. All their life is about is me. Just like my other Ukrainian friend was talking about in my earlier video, where she said, when the Soviet Union fell, and people during the Soviet Union had this idea, we're all in this together, let's support each other, let's build a society that works for everybody. After the Soviet Union fell, it all became wrapped up in hyper-individualism. It's all about me and what's good for me, and who cares about anybody else. And that's what has happened to a large extent in post-Soviet Union, and in Ukraine. It has reached the point where the corruption is just so intense that even the United States, which I'd like to point out that when the Russians started their special military operation, in which they were not wholesale bombing. It's not like they did a shock and awe campaign. When the United States the United States decides to single out a country, based on lies, in fact, it's like Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, or Saddam threw babies out of incubators and left them to die in the cold floor. Total lies. They invade Saddam. They invade Iraq. They bomb the crap out of them, destroy their infrastructure, make it impossible to live. 500,000 babies die because of malnutrition and lack of clean water and things like that. That's the U.S. way of waging a war. When Russia went into Ukraine, what they saw was that the United States had basically armed Ukraine to the teeth, based on after they staged a coup against a democratically elected government, and immediately turned against the Russian ethnic population, which makes up at least half, if not more, of the population of Ukraine. And finally, after 8 years of bombing and terrorizing those people, with clear intention to stage a serious secondary attack, their first attempt failed in 2014 and 2015. So they negotiated something called the Minsk Agreements, which was supposed to solve this problem and give Russian-speaking people as rights and some degree of autonomy within the country of Ukraine. And they completely broke their promises. They were obviously planning to attack those people with all the weapons that they'd been supplied with by not just Biden, but also by Trump, who says he has nothing to do with this war. This is another example of this psychological disconnect between what people think, what they say, and what they do. So here we are, and Russia has gone into Ukraine, and in response to that, the U.S. Ruling class says we have to do something about this. Those dirty Russians, how dare they interrupt our totalitarian state that we've just created, where the president throws people into jail, they kill them, they throw opposition politicians into jail, they jail church leaders, they make it impossible for people to pray, as Russian Orthodox Christians, which they've been doing for centuries. And this is all called freedom and democracy in Ukraine that the United States is promoting. It's just so absurd. But at the time when they were appropriating all this money, there was a big question in Congress: should we track this? And there was a big debate, and I think it was Rand Paul and maybe Thomas Massey, two libertarians, were saying we need to track where all this stuff is going. And the Democrats and many of the Republicans said, no, we don't. Let's just send the money. They need this money. They need the weapons. They need all this stuff. And so you talk about hyper-individualism, where it reached the point where I guess it was William Burns, who was a high U.S. government official, went to Zelensky, the president as of 2019, and said, would you please not be so blatant about embezzling billions of dollars? So this is an example. This is like the complete antithesis of Soviet understanding, where we're all in this together. With as far as Zelensky is concerned, we're in this. We're going to make money. This is going to be the best grift ever, and people like Lindsey Graham, they're in on it. They're all making all this kind of money, and this is like hyper individualism to the max. So that was what was going on in Ukraine. And of course, basically, it's the same thing that's going on in Israel, because in Israel, we have this idea of Zionist supremacy, where because our mother happened to be of a particular ethnic group, that we have a right to come in and to steal land, and at a certain point, the people who were the indigenous people, very, very much like the Native Americans in North America, said, we need to defend ourselves. But if you defend yourself against an invader, you're called a terrorist. This is the example of the disconnect between the psychological and the spiritual and the material way that Western civilization operates. They're blaming people for their own crimes. It's really incredible. So there I am. I'm talking with my Israeli friend, and I was saying, the issue here is that, in my opinion, we live in both an inner spiritual world and inner psychological world, where we need to cope with our own inner demons, so to speak. And we have to acknowledge that those demons exist, that there are flaws in our personality, or there are traumas that we haven't faced, or whatever it is. There are certain, we can say, imperfections that that is the fuel for perfecting ourselves as a person. How do we become a better person? But beyond the idea of simply perfecting oneself, we are part of a human community, and there are some people who do not pay attention to the inner life. All they're concerned about is changing the human community. So, in my opinion, there needs to be a balance between these two aspects, because if someone is a very strong sense of social responsibility, but at the same time they're psychologically flawed, the decisions that they make will end up being harmful, even though the intention, their idea may be good, but the intention is tainted by their own inner demon, so to speak. And so I think that in order for society to really develop, you need to have both aspects of it. And it's for that reason that I feel that the idea of I once had a conversation with this guy. He was a Communist Party official in China, a pretty high-ranking party member. I think he was the former mayor of a city. And I was introduced to him, and he asked me what my opinion of Marx was. And I told him that, I had studied German in university, but for some reason they didn't teach Marx, who was probably the most important author and philosopher of the most influential philosopher of the 19th century, and yet it's like verboten, German word for forbidden to even think about talking about owning the means of production, where the working class actually has control over their future. We don't want to talk about that. Everything has got to be privatized, and he who dies with the most toys wins. Anyway, so he says, "What's my opinion of Marx?" I said, "Well, I didn't really study Marx, but I've practiced Buddhism my whole adult life, and my understanding of communism is that you're trying to distribute the wealth as a society fairly so that everybody benefits instead of just a few wealthy people. And on the other hand, the central idea of Buddhism, particularly in Zen and Northern Buddhism, is called we want to save all beings. So that means that without making any distinctions between race, religion, country, anything like that, we're all human beings. How do we help our fellow, our brother and sister human beings, and not just human beings, but even other beings, animals? How do we treat animals well? That sort of thing. So I see Buddhism emphasizes the inner cultivation of the personality, whereas communism or socialism is talking about it from the societal point of view, from the bigger point of view. And both of them, I think, are very valid, and it's very important to develop both of those in a society. And I know that also, from what I understand, in communism, there would be discussions, and people would question their own ideas and their own values. So there is some element of introspection there. So that was what I was trying to get across to my friend, because he was saying, his idea was just forget about the society, just take care of yourself. And I would say that there's no hard and fast path for development. So in some cases, people may feel that they really need to work on themselves first. So in my own case, when I was a young person just coming out of university, I came from a family that was quite fractured and difficult, and I felt I really needed to concentrate on my own, working out my own inner conflicts. But then as I got older, I began to, revisit the social aspects of it, so that at this point now, the reason why I'm making videos like this is to encourage people to explore both of those, but certainly for people who are concentrated on the inner world, to encourage those people to say, well, we do have a responsibility to the planet, to other people, and so we need to do that. And at the same time, if we are simply too preoccupied with paying attention to the big picture, with the broader world, without paying attention to our own life, then we'll have personal problems that get unattended to. So that's what I want to talk about there. Now, we talked about the situation in Israel, and there's this guy. He's been practicing Buddhism for a long time. I asked him how many people actually practice Buddhism in Israel, and he said he thinks maybe 1%. I'm sure that it's well under 10%. But there are people who are practicing. I've met other Israelis, both monks and regular people, who do practice Buddhism. They even come to Thailand and they practice in the temples here. So so we were talking about is it even possible? How do you do that? And he was asking me what temple can he go to practice. Now, but the one of the big issues that he faces, even though he has an intuitive understanding that the Palestinians have been treated unfairly, the media and the society in Israel basically trains people to be, I would say, self-centered, paranoid, and well, let's just say self-centered and paranoid and abusive, because they're taught from a very early age that we poor Jews have been treated badly by everybody and for no good reason, and we should just do whatever we have to do to survive, and if that means taking other people's lands or even starving them to death or bombing them to death, that's all okay, because A, God tells us we can do that, and B, we deserve it because we're victims. And this in my opinion, this is just complete psychological. This is it's beyond delusion. It's really a kind of psychosis, actually. So my friend is grappling with this problem, and so I was saying, that aside from the kind of spiritual truth of our own inner life, we also have external truth. And one of the big problems that Israelis face, not just Israelis, but people in the U.S. and Europe face, is they're unwilling to face historical fact. So, for example, he said, well, Hamas did blah, blah, blah. I said, well, what do you think, not talking about whether they're right or wrong, what would motivate a group of people to attack somebody who has kept them in a prison for decades, restricting the amount of food, medicine, supplies, in order to have some kind of functioning society, and periodically staging bombing campaigns and killing innocent people? At a certain point, people are going to rebel, and that's exactly what happened on October 7th. And I said, are you even aware of how far back this goes? He says, no, I'm not. I said, well, look at 1948. Albert Einstein, you know Albert Einstein, right? He says, yeah, I know Albert Einstein. Do you know Hannah Arendt? No, I don't know Hannah Arendt. Hannah Arendt was the person who wrote Eichmann in Jerusalem. She was documenting the history of the Holocaust, and she wrote about totalitarianism as a social phenomenon. And she and Einstein co-wrote a letter to the New York Times in 1948, and it was co-signed by a number of prominent Jewish leaders who said that Israel has a political faction that was dominated by terrorists, people from the Irgun, which is a terrorist organization, and the Stern Gang, and even the Haganah, which is a military organization. These were all terrorizing Palestinians going back to 1947 and 1948. And he said, gee, I didn't know that. So this is where the intersection of historical truth and absolute truth come together. And then I pointed out to him, what's the most famous street in Tel Aviv? It's Rothschild Boulevard. I said, don't you understand that the whole Israel project was because the British bankers and the Americans wanted to get control of the Middle East, and so they needed a base of people who would do their work for them. Merz, the new German chancellor, said, Israel is doing our dirty work. The truth leaks out from time to time. Our dirty work. This is what has been going on since at least 1917, when the British, who had no say in the Middle East at that time, in what is Palestine or what was in the Ottoman Empire at that time, made promises to the Arabs that they would get democracy. They lied about that, and they also promised to the Zionist Jews that you're going to get a homeland in Palestine. So of course, we'll make sure that the Palestinian people, get some rights too, which of course they lied about. And so, but you see, the problem is Israelis don't they don't know any of this stuff. And even though there are Israeli scholars like Ilan Pape or Norman Finkelstein, who's the child of Holocaust survivors. Max Blumenthal is a younger guy. He's like late 40s. A superb journalist. He and his colleague Aaron Mate have been documenting Israeli crimes going back for years. And but the Israeli public is just, like the United States public, they're in a complete information. I call it it's like an intellectual concentration camp or a psychological concentration camp. I have this saying, you can take the Jew out of the ghetto, but you can't take the ghetto out of the Jew. Now, people are going to be really angry about me for saying that, but because it's not universally true. There are many Jews, have not. They don't buy into this exclusivist Jewish exceptionalist idea of themselves. We're the chosen people. We get special rights. As Begin said, the non-Jews are insects, and we get to boss them around. They're going to be our slaves. Well, that's his totalitarian, highly neurotic or even psychotic idea of the relationship of a particular ethnic group, a particular religion, towards the rest of the world. It's really unfortunate that that's how it is. So the question is, what do we do about that? And so my friend said, well, what should we do? And I told him that my approach is to do exactly what I'm doing, which is to develop or uncover historical truth, so that people can break out of this mental concentration camp that they're in, whether it's in Israel or in the United States or England or the rest or Europe, because they're all in on this. They all have this idea of European or white supremacist exceptionalism, which gives them the right to dictate to the rest of the world. It's not going to work because at a certain point, the rest of the world has become strong enough to say, no, we're not going to do this. So that brings us back to the beginning of my discussion, where you have people like Ursula von der Leyen lecturing the Chinese, or the American lecturing the Chinese about sending trade items to Russia that could be made into weapons. Meanwhile, she completely overlooks the fact that the United States has armed Ukraine to the teeth after staging a coup and blaming and saying it's Russia's fault for unprovoked. Well, the United States, staged a coup against the democratically elected government of Ukraine unprovoked, and yet they blame Russia. So this is the kind of psychological split that we see. It's just absolutely endemic in Western civilization, and the rest of the world, generally speaking, seems to be becoming more and more aware of it and willing to say, enough, we're not going to do this anymore. So that's essentially what I want to talk about here, and I hope that I've given some food for thought about this issue of spirituality versus social action. We need to integrate both of those. We need to explore historical truth. We need to ask the right questions and do independent research, so that when we hear some statement from a government official, particularly from the United States, and they make some assertion, the question is that really true, and who benefits from making this statement? If we ask those kinds of questions, then we can hopefully disentangle ourselves. In closing, one of the most, I guess you could say, kind of inspirational anecdotes that motivates me is that this is during the time of the Buddha. Someone came up to him and said, inner tangle, outer tangle, this whole generation in a tangle. Who will untangle the tangle? And the Buddha said, that person who is wise and ardent in trying to develop and understand the truth, they will untangle the tangle. Well, he said that 2,500 years ago. This whole generation in a tangle, inner tangle, outer tangle. We need to face our own demons individually, and we need to face our own demons collectively. And that is the only way that we can free ourselves from this current situation. So thanks again for listening to my little rant here on a Sunday afternoon. I appreciate your attention. If you'd like to support my channel, I really appreciate that. I'm planning to do some travel, and it will. I'm contemplating going to actually a Buddhist conference in Russia in September, and it's going to be an international Buddhist conference. And one of the then they're going to be talking about this stuff. What is how can we spread awareness both within ourselves, and how can we help society as one? This is like one particular interest group. It's not like, it's like I don't want to say it's the Christians are the right ones, or the Muslims are the right ones, or it's not like that. It's we find our own path towards developing ourselves based on our personal history and our own path. And there's no right or wrong. It's just what we do. It's our intention. How can we help ourselves? How can we help other people? And so I'm thinking of going to this conference. It does cost a few $1,000s to do it. So if you'd like to help me do that, you can make a contribution to my Substack, or through PayPal, or buy me a coffee. So thanks again for listening, and I'll talk to you soon.